You're listening to Two Bobs, conversations on the art of creative entrepreneurship with David C. Baker and Blair Enns.
Blair, I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions today. I'm going to put you on the spot. The subject is something that you've been thinking about for a while. It's this notion of sources or examples of inspiration. Like who do we learn from? Who do principals, particularly your clients, the people who go through your training program, who do they learn from? What are their sources of inspiration? What first of all, what got you thinking about this? And has it been going on in your mind for a while or just something recent?
I had to do a little meditative exercise before this recording because my goal here is not to go crazy, not to go off on some sort of rant, because it's a topic that's just, it's like cloying at me, or it's like a burr under my saddle.
So my goal is to get you on the rant.
Yeah, I know. I never should have admitted that. It's like there's nowhere to go from here but just implosion.
So when does this hit you? Like, what are some of the triggers for this, things you hear?
So it's always the same trigger, and it'll be sometimes I hear it in a sales call when I'm talking to somebody who's considering signing up for a training program, but more often I hear it as a complaint from a client, somebody who's in our training program. Mm-hmm. And it's when we're talking about the peer-to-peer learning that's part of our program, where we put firms into owners of firms into different peer groups. So you can facilitated by a coach, but you've got these peers, like 4 or 5 other owners of other creative or marketing firms. And obviously we're managing for client conflict, so there's nobody who does exactly what you do, but you're all kind of largely in the same business. And the complaint, I guess, if that's the term, I get is, I'm not getting anything out of this. These other businesses are nothing like mine, and that drives me up the wall.
Remember,
when somebody says,
meditate. Remember,
yeah,
you're starting to lose it already.
Yeah, it drives me nuts.
When they say they can't learn anything, do they mean specifically like this firm is smaller than mine? They obviously are way further. They're not where we are on the path, and I've already gone through all that stuff. Is that what they mean? Is it more about size of the firm?
Yeah, sometimes size. Sometimes a person making that statement is prejudiced by the size of another firm. Like early on, they'll just look at the firm and say, "Well, yeah, that my firm's larger than that." I'm fond of saying, I don't know if I can say. I'm fond of saying agencies are like penises. Pause.
Yeah, pause.
I love saying this from a stage in the UK or a real proper audience. Agencies are like penises. Nobody ever says mine is bigger than yours, but there's a lot of like sideways measuring up in the locker room.
You have no idea what I would like to talk about right now, but I'm going to resist. But I saw that years ago when I don't do it so much anymore, but I'd go to these conferences and I would watch people interact. And so like between sessions and so on out in the lobby or whatever. And so these 2 people would come up and there would be a name tag. And so you'd know the name of the person and you would know maybe where they were from, the name of the firm. And so one of the early questions would be, "Oh, well, tell me about your firm. How many people are at your firm?" And what they were doing was obvious. It's like, I want to figure out a way to use my time as well as I can. So if, 4-person firm. Okay, next, I'm thinking of an emergency call I'm making to myself. I need to talk with somebody who's obviously more sophisticated because there are 20 people at their firm. But it's not just about size in your case. Like, it's deeper than that. When you say that when they say like that firm is nothing like mine, they mean something besides just size, right?
Yeah, and I should just kind of caveat that there are certain instances where certain topics that we'll be discussing that it might be where the perspective of somebody whose business is closer to yours is more valuable. But in a lot of the times, I think the opposite is true. Like I'm in an entrepreneurial coaching program. There's 40 other entrepreneurs in the program that I'm in, and there's nobody in there whose business is like mine. And I've had some great conversations with a guy who's like in the snow removal business. Yeah, and just being fascinated by his business and taking lessons from him, and that just happens every time I'm together with this group. I end up talking to somebody who's got a completely different business than mine, and maybe it's a personal bias because I really go out of my way to look for examples and sources of inspiration that are far beyond the business that I'm in. And again, maybe it's a personal bias, but I'm going to say what I think here. And that is, I think it's the height of intellectual laziness to keep looking when you're looking for, there's something about benchmarks, right? But benchmarks they're dangerous too. I think it's the height of intellectual laziness to not look beyond those firms that you see as most like yours for examples of how you might do things. And that's the frustration I get when somebody says, well, I don't like that person's business is nothing like mine. From my point of view, when I look at their businesses, I see businesses that have 98.5% of everything in common, like the DNA of a human and a chimp. There's just so much more in common, and they pick up on the small number of differences and think, well, because of these small number of differences, it doesn't make sense for me to stop and think what I might learn from this person.
So are they using that as a way to even subconsciously dismiss the possible changes of course they might make because it doesn't apply directly enough to them? Like I noticed, like in my own consulting, I'll make a recommendation to somebody, and the more courageous it is, or more courageous it would be for the client to do, the more they ask me, well, can you connect us with somebody who's gone through this? And I'll say, well, why? It's like, well, we just want to figure out from their experience. And it's like, well, no, because they haven't signed up to be a consultant, switching to my side of the business for a minute. And also, like, courageous choices are the ones that a lot of other people aren't necessarily making. But why are they doing that? But sorry to interrupt you there. But is it because it gives them permission to not follow the advice they might otherwise learn from?
Yeah, it's a prejudice, and what's behind the prejudice, and I think the answer to why is intellectual laziness. I think it's and I think firms that. I think the most successful firms, like the people that you and I work with, where you get a client, you think, wow, you get into the business, you think, wow, this person is really smart. They take a lot of risks. They've built something that's really, in some ways, quite different from anything I've ever seen before. This person as an individual is smart and fascinating. That's not somebody who's looking for the business closest to his or hers as an example of how to do things. That's somebody who is actively trying to get away from the competition. Like we use the term outside the box like all the time, right? So outside the box. I want to be thinking outside the box, but I can't take inspiration, information, example from this other person because they're outside the box. That's what drives me crazy. Yeah. It's this conflict of like we either mean that and we apply that to how we shape and grow our businesses, or we don't mean it at all.
So, yeah, and as you were saying that, it just hit me like it hadn't before. It's like these individual firms, and you and I could probably name them. There's 10 that keep coming up in conversations as the famous firms that all the other creative, non-famous firms want to emulate. They're famous in part because they're not doing things the way other people are doing them, right? So yeah, I get your point. So it's either we can't have it both ways. Either we should or we shouldn't learn from them. So I'm trying to sort of dovetail this though with the notion of specialization and learning from similar situations. Like, how does this apply? How do we reconcile that? So here, as a firm, you're advising your clients to focus in a way to see similar patterns. In a way, you're saying ignore some of the outliers and just pick up the patterns by observing situations that are very close to each other. How does that fit with this advice?
Well, I think the idea of observing patterns really is just, it's your client patterns. It's not necessarily the patterns. I think you need to be careful observing the patterns of what your direct competitors are doing. I also think, and some people might see this as heretical, I abhor the idea of going to kind of a conference and listening to a client say what they want. I think that's a huge mistake. I think when I listen to clients get up on a stage at some sort of conference and admonish agencies or say to agencies, here's what I want from you. I think you need to pay attention to some of that. But the letter of what a client says they want from you is A, probably not exactly what they need, and B, almost certainly not in your best interest to deliver. So I think you need to be careful about and every valuable kind of idea or leap forward is probably based not just on an idea, but a duality of some kind. So you need to be able to take this idea, the thing that I just said, which is don't pay so much attention to your competitors or to your clients. And some people are just reeling at that, right? They just cannot comprehend this. And so you need to be able to take that idea, and then you need to be able to take the opposite idea of, well, you have to be tuned into your clients. There is a small amount of information that it might be beneficial for you to know about a direction that the field is heading in, just in case you're making a horrible mistake. So you need to take these kind of polar opposite ideas and somehow move forward and make them make sense for you. And if you're an intellectually lazy person, you're going to have a hard time with that because you're an extreme, you're a one thing or the other. But I really think that I'm going off on a tangent here. It's like if you want to grow, if you want to leap forward, if you want to reinvent your business, if you want to take your life to the next level, you want relationships, whatever, you need to be able to take two conflicting ideas and somehow make sense of them and find, what is essentially a third way. And we can talk more about that idea later, maybe.
So listening to ideas from different places, and then when you hear an idea that doesn't gel with what you have believed up until that point, just sit with the discomfort until you can figure out exactly what's happening. But how do you personally systematize this? So I know what you don't want to listen to. So like you're not likely to want to read sales books out there, but how do you allow yourself to get drawn to the right things? Like how do you open your mind up very intentionally to ideas that might be new to you? Where do you get those from?
I think it's just being open to the idea that you need to be open to all kinds of sources of inspiration, and you need to be going down avenues and looking at businesses with kind of a curious eye without knowing why you're going down that avenue. I remember reading a book once it was on Parkinson's disease. I don't have Parkinson's disease. I'm not close to anybody who has Parkinson's disease. And the whole time I'm reading this book thinking, I'm not sure. I know there's a reason I'm reading this book, and I'm not sure what it is. And then I read a sentence about 2/3 of the way through the book, and I went, that's what I was looking for the whole time. So the idea that I think you need to be open to exploring like not parallel worlds, adjacent worlds. You look at what you do, and if it's like a marketing for healthcare, then you should be exploring things outside of healthcare, and you should be exploring things outside of marketing, especially if we talk about marketing or whatever the discipline is, because you can take what it is that a firm does, and you can break it down into discipline for market. So we do this for these types of people. So the discipline, if it's marketing, if it's UX design, if it's public relations, if it's app dev, whatever the discipline is, you'd be I'm not saying avoid what's going on in that space, but you really should be spending, I would say, more time looking at things that are going on adjacent to that space than things that are going on in that space. So you're very scientific at what you do, right? Like you've said before, you consider yourself a scientist, and basically the mechanism through which you do science is your consulting practice. And I'm not scientific in that way because I don't have the attention to detail and the kind of the rigor to be able to do the kind of detailed studies that you do. But I'm very, very interested in science. I read a lot about all the different branches of science. Maybe I don't read any chemistry, but I read about physics. I read about biology. I read about the social sciences quite a bit, deep into economics the last few years. And the reason is I'm constantly looking for models. And a model is simply a way of looking at the world, right?
Yeah.
And maybe more specifically, it's a way at looking at your client's world or your client's businesses. So I'm looking for models that I can bring back into sales and into a training business. So I can bring it back into my own intellectual property, and I can bring it back into my own business model. So I'm constantly exploring other fields for models. And I think, and maybe I know from objective tests that my need for information is higher than the average person. I love just inputting. In a strength finder assessment, my number one strength is input. I love collecting information. So I'm biased that way, and I recognize that not everybody has that kind of desire to collect information the way I do. But I believe strongly that you need to be pulling from multiple models to find something that's kind of optimal for your business. And if you just keep looking at other firms that are exactly like yours, you're just like, you are furthering the commodification of your space. And you and I know that, there are some ecosystems within the marketing firm space where everybody is copying each other.
You're listening to Two Bobs, conversations on the art of creative entrepreneurship. Your hosts are David C. Baker of Recourses, author, speaker, and advisor to owners of expert firms, and Blair Enns of Win Without Pitching, the sales training and coaching program for creative entrepreneurs. For more information, go to twobobs.com. If you find this podcast helpful, please help us by telling a friend and rating us on iTunes. Thank you. Now back to David and Blair.
Yeah, and if you do a Google search, you're going to find similar firms to yours day after day after day, thousands and thousands of them. And that makes your job trying to differentiate your firm even more difficult. I think of it a little bit as like the shape of a T, the letter T. So there's really deep expertise, and over the years, your expertise gets deeper and deeper, but the crossbar at the top is more of a broad relevance. And so the broad relevance is what keeps the expertise within a context that makes sense. Something else that I've tried to do more over time is to also try and apply the thinking, whatever it happens to be that I'm thinking about nowadays, would be to apply it globally. So like take what this thought that I have now, plant it in a remote village in Bolivia. Does it make sense? Or have I just thought of this very weird first world solution that isn't broadly relevant? That's the advantage to me in traveling as well. And when you're traveling, I am just as interested in talking with a cab driver on the seawall in Havana as I am in talking with, actually maybe more interested in talking with that cab driver in Havana than I am with talking with some diplomat of France or something. It's like, how does this person make their life work? How do they think about these things? How is this deep expertise that I'm trying to develop, how am I keeping it within a broader context, like worldwide? I think that would be a big advantage. Maybe it'd be tough to have so many people sign up for your training from all over the world, but it also would be a fun challenge so that the principles you're espousing in this program, they work in different countries. They're not just working in New York City, but they're working in Australia, for instance, with 1/10 the population and the same landmass.
Yeah, I always think the person in New York or maybe LA who's in a class with somebody from Australia and Oklahoma, and you get that geographic diversity, you get the discipline diversity. You got a PR firm, you've got a landscape design firm, you've got a internal communications firm, you've got a UX firm. I was like, those are the best classes, and where you get this ecology or this cross-pollination, but some people can't see it. And as you're talking, I'm wondering, well, is there really just two groups of people or a spectrum of where some people are curious and look, I guess I don't know how to say it, and some people aren't. Maybe that's probably overly harsh. Let me ask you, beyond travel, where do you get your inspiration from? And equally, like, what sources of inspiration or I guess examples do you work to avoid or shut out?
So my inspiration comes from reading broadly. That would probably be the primary source, just because it's so easy. So easy as in it's accessible to me wherever I am. So when I get up in the morning, I'm going to read the same worldwide publications every day, and then there's some things I read weekly, and I'm very quickly scanning them to say, does that fit in my worldview? Does that fit in my worldview? Or, oh, that one doesn't. What do I need to modify about my worldview? Or what strikes me as odd here? And it's the notion of skim, and then find something that I can dive really deep into because it's fascinating. And often I'll talk with Julie, my wife, about it, and she may not be as fascinated as I was, or I'll find some willing soul that acts interested for a minute, and I'll talk to them about it, and then I'm bam going on to the next thing. You described yourself as a collector of information. You like input. I'm not the same. I'm not the same as you are there, but I do find that I have to have some way to categorize or catalog the information I get, because I know I'm going to use it in some way. So I think I looked at this yesterday, there's like 260 different article ideas that I want to write. So I come across something, I throw it in there, and that gives me the freedom to come across something else and throw it in there and not have to write about it right now. So to me, it's mainly reading. The second source of inspiration would be travel for me. It's just stepping into a new country that I've either been to or haven't been to before. And like I'm speaking 3 times in Guatemala in a week and a half, and I'm very excited about doing it. And I know I'll learn a lot. I'll sit and I'll talk with these people about their business lives, and it'll be fascinating to me because I really think there's this, it's not even subtle. There's this business arrogance that the U.S. has in particular, that some of it is deserved, not the arrogance, but the confidence. Some of it is deserved, but a lot of it is not. And I admire people that are making their business lives work in cultures where it's just not as easy as it is here. It's so easy to do everything in the U.S. that I'm really amazed at other countries where that isn't the case.
Yeah, isn't that? And especially during good economic times, and depending on who you're listening to, we're kind of ripe for the ship to go the other way. Hey, I want to ask you before we wrap up here, just so you're a management consultant, and if I said to you, if I made a comment about your participation in the community, mm-hmm. the community of your profession, what would your reaction be? Like, what's your relationship to the community
of management consultants?
Yeah.
I don't have any, honestly. I don't belong to any associations.
So you don't. Okay, no associations.
Never
you don't
been
feel
to a
like
conference. No.
Yeah.
No.
So have you thought about, because if you think about our clients who are designers, there's very definitely a design community, and I've been wondering, well, why is there's probably a loose community of independent management consultants, and of course you would never like Marx, who would never join a club that would have him as a member. Groucho, not Carl.
Yeah.
Have you thought about how that community of other practitioners is important to designers but not important to you, and what that says?
Yeah, I do. I've often marveled actually, at how a creative, whether a designer or a writer or a videographer or whatever, how excited they'll get if they're invited to address their peers at some conference.
To give away whatever secrets they might have. Yeah.
Yeah, right. They're much more excited about that than if they were invited to address, say, do a keynote address at a conference that gathered their prospects, which is so backwards to me, because one is about landing new business and one is about speaking to the choir that is never going to hire you. That's always fascinated me. I think that creatives in particular feel like business is a second. It's an afterthought. It's what they do because they haven't figured out how to make money otherwise, and so it's a necessary evil. But they really like to be with their kind. I don't think other management consultants are my kind. I don't to me, every once in a while I happen to run across an article written by a management consultant, or I see the proceedings of. I've never been to a single conference. I don't have any of those certifications. I don't belong to any of those associations. It feels to me like it's a process of dumbing down consultants so that we are all doing the same things. And I just want to throw up a little bit of my mouth when I think about it. I have no interest whatsoever in being like that. And so it's never even occurred to me, I guess. Maybe it should. There probably are something. Now, I've read some management consulting books that I've really learned a lot from. David Maister has had a big influence on me. There are a couple that have. But in general, no, it hasn't interested me at all. Not as nearly as much as my clients.
Yeah. It's interesting how, and I don't think that designers are wrong for wanting to be. They're part of a guild, basically, this craft of, this guild of craftsmen. So I get that. And again, here's an example of I'm going to say something extreme, and you need to basically take the power of this idea and hold it with some other opposing ideas and come up with a solution. But I'll just point out that, who is Google's community? If the way designers talk about the community. Does Google talk about when you're in Peter Thiel's words? When you're a creative monopoly, or maybe it's white space, blue ocean, whatever parlance or framework you want to use. When you have built something that didn't previously exist before, you're not part of a community because you've just invented space. Right? You've just invented something where previously there was nothing. Now I'm not saying there's very few creative firms or marketing firms who are going to actually do that, create a creative monopoly for a variety of reasons. But that is one end of this spectrum. And the other end of the spectrum is just full commoditization, right? It's full commoditization. In the fully commoditized space, there's a community of commoditized producers. So when I'm doing kind of a win without pitching stump speech, introducing the core concept, we're talking about the book, I vary to a group of designers. Usually the first question I get after the speech is, Blair, what can we as a community do or as a profession do to combat free pitching? And my answer is always, that's the wrong question. And then I pose a question in reply. I say, if you could learn to win without pitching while your competitors continued to along this inefficient path of giving their thinking away for free, staying up all night writing proposals, it's high cost of sale, what would you prefer? Would you prefer the profession is fixed or you get fixed and everybody else continues to suffer?
Sort of
nobody ever answers that.
Right.
Yeah, I know the answer I would choose.
Yeah, keep sucking as a profession so that it's easier to climb. But, you and I I'm not sure that our dreams for our clients match their dreams for themselves. I don't say that with any sort of judgment. But I do think that a lot of principals would really be generally satisfied with being as good as the average firm with a predictable income and not rocking the boat all that much. I think it could be that I'm kind of working ourselves out of a job here, but maybe
it seems like every podcast ends up with you and I like making the group that we're relevant to smaller and smaller. Go ahead, just keep destroying our businesses.
But our dreams are bigger for our clients than their dreams are for themselves. I think many of them would be happy being a slightly above average firm from Minnesota, so to speak, to use that illustration that, the Lake Wobegon thing. They're slightly above average, and that's enough. Like the risk reward it doesn't pay off enough for them. Whereas my perspective as a human is more, I'm going to crush it or I'm not going to do it. But I don't think that's the perspective that many of my clients do. And that's not meant as judgment. It's just meant as fact. Like, what do I do with that?
Yeah. Okay. What was the topic of this podcast?
I have no idea.
I feel a little better though.
Okay. You did a pretty good job of holding the rant in. I'm going to let it build up a little bit more, and then we're going to lance that sucker later.
All right.
Thanks,
good.
Blair.
That was fun.
Thank you for listening to Two Bobs with David C. Baker and Blair Enns. Subscribe and learn more at twobobs.com. That's the number 2, BOBS.com.